Hey Collective, it's Al and welcome back to Altruistic Channel. Today's video is going to be dedicated towards finally uploading that video I've been working on that I was speaking to about the creative exercise that actually deals with a tale of morals and ethics in a very, very cutesy kind of way, but that in a way it actually deals more with the adult audience than it would with a child audience. Obviously, this is an 18 and over crowd, but essentially what I wanted to do is actually immerse you all into an experience through storytelling in a very creative way, which I would like to call fairy tale theater. And when I say fairy, I mean, hey girl, hey, tale, theater. So, let's begin. This story begins in the not-so-distant future with a man walking through a parking lot. He's dressed with an overcoat, a pair of jeans, and a nice formal shirt, as he walks into what appears to be a grocery store. As he makes his way, you can tell that he's in a haste, but that he's kind of, sauntering, not really focusing on much around him other than trying to get into the store. As the sliding doors open, he looks at the security guard and he says, "Hey, where are the sodas? And I don't want the cold ones, but the warm ones." And the security guard points him over, and as he leaves, he acknowledges Joe, and he says, "Thank you, Joe," having never met the man, and the security guard looks a little confused, but lets it go as just, they must have met before. And so he walks over to the aisle, he gets his warm soda, because that's what he likes, and then he goes to the register to get his cigarettes, which is essentially why he's in the grocery store to begin with. As he walks up to the register, he notices there's a couple with 3 kids in front of him that are just paying for their groceries, and so he looks over casually at the tabloid tales, and he sees a story with his own face on the cover, and obviously his name's on it, and so he looks at it and kind of rolls his eyes, and he goes, "Do I really want to know what's going on with me right now?" And so he leans over, and they're just giving the credit card over to the cashier. So he grabs the tabloid, and he starts to, peruse through the magazine. It's a tale about him and his husband, and how his husband is now cheating on him with a mule. And he's like, "Oh, a mule. Well, that's an upgrade." And he's like, "Or is he the mule?" I can't really decide as he's reading it. And so he's looking in and he just reads it, and he's kind of giggling to himself in that Roseanne Husky kind of way. And he's kind of giggling at the stupidity behind it. And as he looks towards the end, he sees that they got his age wrong. And his eyes flash red, like an amber red, really dark. And he gets a little flustered and he goes, "Son of a bitch, they know I'm not fucking 45 years old. They know I'm only 42. And so he's a little miffed. And he finally gets up to the register and he goes, "I want a carton of fucking Marlboro." And I probably shouldn't say Marlboro, but he was something to the effect of Marlboro. And so the cashier gets the thing, and he notices the couple in front of him, the kids aren't really smiling and they're not moving about, and he thinks that's kind of odd because parents these days don't control their children. And of course he's just a little bit like, ooh, interesting. So he's looking at them, he puts the tabloid back, the woman's starting to make her way back with his carton of smokes, and he's super happy because, smokers. And so as she comes back, he hands her the money. And as she's ringing it up, he looks over and he sees that it's a Spring Vogue magazine. He's like, "Ooh, Spring Vogue." And just as he goes to reach for it, and he's thinking about paying for it, because it's, gay men in Spring Vogue. And so he's about to grab it, and all of a sudden the earth starts to shake very violently behind him. And he is the only one not startled by the sudden shaking of the land. And so as he looks at the magazine now, he's actually perusing it, and he is about to hand her the money for it, when he notices that the back of the building falls down, and all the people inside start screaming, and there's havoc and mayhem going on. And so being who he is, he kind of, takes the page, and he's looking through it. And he's getting a little annoyed by the fact that he can't concentrate, so he snaps his fingers and mutes the entire environment. And so he's looking, and he goes, "Ooh, Kenneth Cole has new shoes." And he's looking at that, and suddenly he sees, out of the peripheral part of his mind, eyes, he looks back and he sees a couple behind him fall into hell, essentially. And he's like, "Oh." And he goes back and he's, "Oh, I want that peacoat." And so as he's about to talk to the cashier about getting the magazine, because he had already paid, he looks at front and he sees that the couple that had 3 kids in front of him suddenly start to scream, and he unmutes it, and he's just in time to see that the 3 kids disappear. They vanish right in front of his eyes. And he goes, "Ooh." And then he looks at the cashier, and she vanishes right then. And he's like, "Shit." And so he looks at the couple in front of him, and now complete panic, and it's just basically the people who were trying to run out of the store that's left, and then the security guard, and then the couple. And so he looks at his hand and he goes, "Why did the kids disappear?" And suddenly there's a list, and it says, "Because they beat their children every night and they are unhappy and terrified of their parents." And he goes, "Yep, that'll do it." And so he vanishes the little piece of paper, and with the gentle nudge of his foot, he takes a little cart that they had been packing everything in, and he kicks it so that they fall into hell themselves, and he goes, "Enjoy." And he notices the only person in the entire grocery store that's left, besides the ones that vanished, is the security guard. So he's like about to say something to the security guard about staying calm. And all of a sudden he hears a horn over his head, and he goes, "But I haven't paid for my magazine." And then the horn becomes a full fucking boom and kind of parts his hair, and now he's a little miffed, and he's like, "I never get to enjoy myself." And so suddenly 2 angel wings spring from out of his back, and he starts to take flight. And so he's going up just in time to see that the security guard makes it out to the parking lot into his car, as he's about to get into the car when the entire building of what's left collapses in, and a huge crevice along all of the fault line behind him opens and starts to swallow all of the town. But as he's flying up, he is about to reach the heavens elevator, and just as he does, he sees the security guard makes it out of the parking lot, and he goes, "Oh, good, okay." And so he gets into the elevator, and of course it's music, and you know how angels like music. They fucking hate music. It's like that music. So he's sitting there, and he's kind of like tapping his toe, and he's like, "I could have fucking flown there," and he's like kind of begrudgingly a little bitchy. And so finally he gets to the top, and the doors slide open, and suddenly he sees angels' feathers flying everywhere. It's a whole havoc, panic set into everything. There are all these people lining the hallways of heaven, and he's looking, he's going, "Oh my god, where did we do a recruitment fucking thing? What did we do? Did I miss something?" And suddenly he sees something pop into his hand, and it says, "You're late." And he goes, "I know," and it vanishes. And so now he's looking at all the people screaming, and then he's hearing all the people beneath him on earth screaming, and he's looking at everybody, and there's angels putting out fires, everybody's putting fucking fires out, and he's like, "Oh my god, like they've never done this before." And he's getting a little exacerbated, not because of anything going on, but just because of the sound. So he mutes it again, and just so you guys know in the story, what happens when he mutes, only the people that he directly talks to have the ability to break through the mute. Everything else is surround proof, right? So he's seeing all the people crying in the hallway, and he's just like, "Oh, all right, so I guess most of them, they're the only survivors." Well, that's what happens during, rapture. And so he gets, and suddenly there appears a door in front of him. And as the door opens, he sees a very, very testy gay man with his angel wings all fluffed, like all fucked up, and he's just all flustered. And he's like, "Why can you never fucking be on time? Like, what is it with you, Gabriel? Why can you never fucking run here on time? You knew that you had to be in the suit. You knew that I had this all set up for you." And he's like, so then Gabriel looks at him and goes, "Calm and collected, Annie. Just give me the suit. I will put it on. Where's my hat?" He wanted a top hat. But they said, "You couldn't have a top hat, Gabriel, because last time you wore a top hat was to a wedding. This is definitely not a fucking wedding, so you don't get the top hat." So he looks at the very testy gay man in front of him, and he goes, "If you weren't my brother." And the brother looks at him and goes, I know. Just put this on, please." And it's a beautiful, I think he said it was gray suit. It's a beautiful gray suit that kind of goes with his skin tone and all that stuff, and it goes with his like little salt and pepper beard. Anyway, so he puts the suit on, and he takes 2 steps, and so the very testy angel disappears, and so does the little changing room, and he walks into the hallway, and now everybody is just sobbing. Apparently they had put on the big screens up in heaven all of what was going on earth, and everybody in the heavens and all of the higher realms were starting to show up, and it looked a little bit like Hogwarts or whatever that little place was where they all go for meetings. And so he's seeing that, and he's seeing all the people now sobbing as they see their homes being destroyed, and he sees that they see as their families get swallowed either in hell or they go to purgatory or wherever they're going to go. It depends on how they live their life and if they're all moral majority and all castigati and all that stuff. So he's just looking at everybody, and he's like, "Oh dear gosh, I got candy. And he starts to hand out candy to all the people, and he's looking at some of the faces. He doesn't recognize everybody, but he recognizes some of them, and he's a little bit relieved to see some of the faces, but he realizes that they're missing their partners, and he's starting to understand it better. He knew, but it's one of those things that when you're there, it kind of changes the environment for you, and so he's like, "Oh, all right." And so he's like, "Listen, let me just tell you this. You guys made it, okay? Yes, other people did not make it. They decided to be evil. They decided to be manipulative. They decided to be to sit there and enslave races, and they tried to make people secondary, and they made their own choices. You made the right choices. I need you all to focus and stay with us because you've made it to heaven. You are safe." And so even though it was like kind of begrudgingly, they kind of started to simmer down a little bit, and then he sees the great hall, and it opens the doors, and of course he sees all of the seraphims and all of the higher realms all present in the above. And then he sees the table where he and the other judges are to sit, and he sees that his seat is empty, and next to him is where Michael should be sitting, but Michael's not there yet. So now he gets testy himself because his husband hasn't shown up yet. And he's all pissed off about it as he sits down. He looks over at Raphael and he says, "Look, where the hell is Michael?" And Raphael goes, "Calm and collected, Gabriel. He's on his way. He just had to stop and drop the kids off because you didn't pick up the kids." And Gabriel kind of looks sheepishly down and goes, "Oh, I forgot. Sorry." And he goes, "Well, your husband's doing it, so just calm down and just focus on what you need to do." And so the blue horn is in front of Gabriel. And so just as he's starting to feel the pitter-patter of Michael approaching, because you can always tell when it's your husband, and he starts to feel the approach of his partner, and he hears the rumbling of the boss showing up. So he says, okay, it's time to blow the horn. And so just as he's about to, the boss sits down, and everyone falls, at least in the courtroom, falls very silent. And they look onto the panel of judges, and the boss says, please proceed with the accusations and then what each of you have decided to vote on. And so Gabriel pulls out a huge list out of nowhere, and he looks at it with his little feather, and he goes, hypocrisy, greed, manipulation, coercion, enslavement, rape, incest, and he goes through the entire list, and there's about 42 things on the list at the very least. And one of the last things he says is child enslavement and child sex trafficking. And so the divine says to Michael, he says, you're the foreman, please begin. How do you vote? And so Michael says guilty. And they skip Gabriel because Gabriel is the person who speaks. He's the last one to say anything. So they go to Raphael, and Raphael says guilty. And then they go to Uriel, and Uriel says guilty. Then Azrael, the guilty. And they go all the way down to the 11. And finally, it's time to come to the floor person who's going to actually give the final verdict about what happens to the earth for all of the crimes that they have committed against themselves and against all of creation. And so, just as they're about to come to Gabriel starts to shake a little bit because Gabriel has been holding out over and over and over again. I know that you guys here in the 3D reality believe that Gabriel is the bad guy, but just so you know, between Michael and Gabriel, they're kind of the only ones holding up the tent, if you know what I'm saying. So he is sitting there, and he's been dragging his feet on it, and just as he's about to say no, which would hung the jury, and then everything would be kind of in vain. So finally, Raphael suddenly throws a picture in front of Gabriel's face, and it says, child molesters in churches. And Gabriel has no choice. He says the ill-fated words. He says, guilty. And as he does, everything everywhere goes silent except for the turmoil and chaos and the volcanoes exploding and the lands separating on Earth. And you see him look down, and he's not looking at Earth per se, he's just looking away from the screens. And everything in the courtroom is quiet, and all of the seraphims and all of the other archangels and everybody is just starting to get very upset, and they're sobbing. And God looks at Gabriel, and he says, are you sure? And Gabriel looks at God and says, there are a great many things that we in creation will allow. We allow free will so the souls can make the proper choices in this great Earth Academy, and we allow them to make bad decisions because they themselves must pay the consequences. But when you enslave and hurt children and you don't do anything about it, and when you try to manipulate and coerce people into being raped essentially with whatever format you're trying to do, we the archangels cannot allow such things to continue on because they will infect the rest of the cosmos. And so I'm sorry, sir, the vote is guilty. It is unanimous. And God looks at Gabriel and says, I understand. And so he turns and he starts speaking to the seraphims and the other higher realms, and including the High Council who's present. And the High Council nod in agreement. So God looks at him and says, well, Gabriel, then do your duty. And so Gabriel goes, boo, boo, boo. And with each sound of the blowhorn over from the heavens down onto the earth, more lava begins to flow, more flooding begins to happen, and more turmoil and death begins to permeate all of creation beneath them. And just as the hallways start to fill with outcries and tears and all of the turmoil that comes from the heavens when such things must occur, God says unto Gabriel, before the ill-fated moment, he says, how many were saved? And Michael steps in and says, 244 million. And everyone goes, there's a gay gasp. Oh my God. What? And Gabriel is now kind of adjusting himself, and he's smiling. And God says to Gabriel, how? And Gabriel says, there's a couple people out in the hallway who decided that they would change the 144,000 in your honor. They decided that it would be better to set aside their differences and their greed and ego in order to work with each other. And God says, really? And he says, whatever made them think that that's what I wanted? And Michael jumps in and says, because one person in particular had the balls to stand up and said this made no sense, that the things that were going on down there did not add up. And he saw through the facade, and he knew that if anything of your creation, you would want as many people to have a fighting chance. So he spoke his truth, and people finally listened to him. And a group of them he brought together, and they went from 144,000 expected souls to make it through the rapture to 244 million who woke up in time. And God says, who are these people? Bring them in. And so Michael turns around and looks at Gabriel as he turns, and he goes, let me go get Sweet Pea. And out of nowhere, you hear all of the other higher realms go, Sweet Pea, Sweet Pea! And everybody's all excited. And everybody's like really thrilled that Sweet Pea's finally there, because they've never met Sweet Pea in person. And so Michael is walking out and goes, Gabriel goes, no. Let me go get my nephew myself. And Michael goes, oh, all right, you are related. So he goes into the hallway, and in the hallway stands a man, probably in his mid-40s as well. And it's one of those timelines that kind of spirals, so don't ask too many questions on that part, on the age. But he's sitting in the hallway. And he is one of those people who's not exactly the tallest person in the world. So as he's sitting there, he kind of is dangling his feet, not fully able to touch the ground. Kind of like a kid on the toilet that is learning for the first time. He's sitting there and he's a little begrudgingly uncomfortable. And the others are right nearby him. But in this particular instance, they want to specifically meet Sweet Pea first because he's the one who brought them together. Him and his friends, essentially. A soul tribe. And so Gabriel walks up to Sweet Pea and says, hey, the boss wants to see you. Are you ready? And Sweet Pea goes, very shakily goes, yeah. And he goes, what about the others? And he goes, we'll bring them in a second, but first the divine wants to meet you in person. So they walk in, and God says to Sweet Pea, yes, I know who you are. You and I have been in contact this entire time, and you actually listened to me. But would you please tell the courtroom why you did what you did, because I found it endearing. And the young, middle-aged man looks at the courtroom and says, because I saw the beauty of everything that you made for us. And I saw the truth of your love in everyone's eyes. Even in their hatred, I saw that it was out of heartbreak or fear. And I wanted to make sure that you were valued as much as you valued our life. Isn't that why the angels had an issue with humans in their own scriptures? They said and they spoke to the fact that we had free will choices, and they never had that. And so I wanted to take advantage of it and do something right by you. And God says unto him, that is very noble, son. But what made you think that I wanted you to save it? Sometimes, in order for rebirth, death must occur. But just so you know, I am grateful that you reminded me of the best part of me. Will you bring the others in now? And so the others come in and they all get introduced to the courtroom. And it's a panel of who's who, essentially, but they are not what they seem, you see. Some souls have returned, and they're here on a mission. They were here to tie up loose ends and awaken as many people as they could. The trick was that they needed to be reminded of who they were. And the man, called Sweet Pea, was the awakener, aka a transitioner. And wouldn't you know it, right as God says, now will you all reveal who you are? Suddenly Jesus appears. Mary Magdalene appears. Sweet Pea becomes Gabriel. They connect. One was the higher realm expression of the lower expression that was the human expression, if you get that. And then Buddha, and then the other masters, all take the place of the humans that brought the world together. And in that moment, it was revealed that it was all part of divine plan that was orchestrated by the highest highs of realms, who knew that humanity could do something good with their legacy and leave something permanent for the rest of the eternity. And as the final blip of sound comes from below, you see all of the archangels become the human beings that survived, and you realize that they were just a lower expression of a game, something that was set to remind us all who we truly are and how powerful we can be and what we can do with our lives. And just as everything fell silent, wouldn't you know it, A brand new earth appeared beneath them. Fresh, brand new, full of love, and magically all of the souls that had been lining the corridors of heaven found themselves waking up in their beds in a new environment where they were always destined to be. Isn't that a great story? What role would you play in the story of the legacy of humanity? Would it be in the end of humanity, or will it be in the rebirth of a better, higher consciousness that already exists around us all? That's it for me, guys. The light's fading.